that I was asked to mention earlier, that if you see someone doing window repair, or ripping out windows and replacing them with vinyl, call 311.
Yes.
They're not supposed to do that. And a lot of people, they'll go and, they'll see it and they'll go, oh, they shouldn't do that, or there ought to be a rule. There is a rule. Call 311, let the city of Sacramento know, and hopefully they will stop them, and hopefully they'll get it before they rip the window out and have to spend money to replace what they just threw in the dumpster with new wood windows. But hopefully we'll get the lesson out faster now.
Yeah, I think it's just this headset is a little funky, so bear with me. People just don't know, and they don't know that like the city will not let you put in new windows. And I'm so happy that the city is doing that. I actually heard a story of on T Street somewhere. Somebody ripped out all their old windows and they put in new windows, and then code enforcement said, no, you can't do that. And so they made them rip the new windows out that they already spent all that money on and put in traditional style windows, but the old ones already went to the dumpster. So, a huge expense for the client, but, it's a right precedent to have, so I like it.
Has anybody told the window companies that what the rules are on that? I mean, that might cut down on that before it happens.
It's a Sacramento thing. I think there are a lot of cities that let you do whatever still, so it's unfortunate. But I'm glad we at least have our city on our side. So, okay, so we're back here, scratching our heads. We got all the paint stripped, we got our roofs done, feeling pretty good. Finishes. To finish up the opening before we start talking about the sashes. What I like to do, and you may have seen it in photos, is I like to, you want to use boiled linseed oil to do all of the interior surfaces. So all of this stuff, you want to do boiled linseed oil all the way down here. The exterior portion, I like to use a varnish, a really good varnish. I recommend the Sicken Cetal Satin Clear. Since you have all that stuff stripped anyway, varnish is just nice looking on any different paint scheme. You can paint that, but after you stripped it, it's just kind of soul crushing to paint it, even if it's like correct color of your trim and all that stuff. And what tends to happen is, if you're really thinking way down the road, every time the house gets painted, they're going to paint that, and it makes it harder to open that upper sash. So I just like to err on the side of, if you varnish it, it's going to be, people are going to be more likely to keep that varnished instead of painting it. I think it's a better way to go, and if they do paint it, and you do strip it off, you're stripping down to the varnish instead of trying to strip down to the bare wood again, because the paint is going to soak into the wood fibers and end up looking wonky. So anyway, but the linseed oil is totally traditional. That's what they used to use, and it makes it look really fresh and look really, really good. And it also just hardens the wood and makes it function better operationally. What you can do, and depending on how far you want to take your windows, you can put some wax on top of that, and then everything just works even better. I don't think it's that necessary, because I want to talk about weather stripping. With old windows, another problem that you have is that they're rattly, and also you don't have, they don't seal up as well. Oftentimes, because houses have settled, this whole frame will be a little bit off, and so because the window sashes have stayed square, you'll have like a little gap here, and it'll be tight there, and it just doesn't fit. What you can do is, and I have on my recommendation sheet too, this is called spring bronze, and it's basically designed to where you nail on this surface here, and then it springs up, and you can see it in action on the window itself. I've been doing this long enough to where I think you can get this. I think Temco makes some of the same stuff that you can get on Amazon. I've bought stuff from Killian Hardware for years because that's the only place I could get it years ago, and I just got to have it of it. And it's good quality stuff. You can buy a 100-foot roll, cost you $100, but it's worth it. It's really good quality stuff. You put this stuff on correctly and you're done for 100 years. This stuff is gonna last. They also make a V-bronze, and I've used the V-bronze before I started using the spring bronze. And the V-bronze is basically, you know, like what I said, it's a V. So this compresses up against the surface and it closes that gap. I'm shying away from it. I still like it, but it tends to take up more space. And when you're talking about the sash, when you're talking about the sash, like, you know, up against here, that space is really important. This stuff is thinner, so you typically don't have to do anything with the sash to make it work. The V-bronze, it takes up more space and it also makes it a little bit stiffer and harder to use. Some situations it's really good. I like this stuff. I think whatever it takes to fill that gap and make it still function is fantastic. And if you use it with good material like that, that's gonna last 100 years, you're great. You don't wanna use a zinc or galvanized nail or anything like that with the bronze brass because, I forget what the term is.
Electrolysis.
Yes, electrolysis, yeah. So basically where the steel or anything like that up against brass and it just kind of corrodes and starts falling apart. You can buy these copper nails from the same place, or you can even buy these at Ace Hardware. And they look good with the stuff and they function. It's great. So what I typically do is like with this window, I cut out around there, and I should have done a cleaner job on here since it's a presentation. But you don't see it when it's closed. And I just put it, you know, just for the most part where that window sash is gonna go, and then on the bottom, the same thing, try to cut that angle. You're not gonna fill that gap 100%. And that obsessiveness about filling it 100% doesn't matter because you're greatly making your windows better. And just know that. And you're also, it's an old house, let it breathe a little bit. So if you have a little bit of air infiltration here, you're still way better off than you were before you started. And so...
Before you move off of that, you probably want to make sure that the metal you put in is taller than the sash it's replacing, so that when you slide up, you don't go beyond it and then catch it when you come back down again. Right? You know what I'm saying?
I don't want to see it when the window's closed.
Right.
What I do with this stuff, and you can see it up here when, you know, if you want to come up and take a look at the window at some point. When I nail this in, I take that edge that's likely to catch and then just bend it.
Oh, okay.
So it's not going to catch on the window sash itself.
Okay.
And just by bending it in, it makes a huge difference. And then I also, like, I think I did that around the pulley too, so it wouldn't catch anywhere there too. Every window situation is different. Sometimes the sashes fit tight, sometimes they fit loose. If they fit loose, you can really spring this stuff out and fill up that gap. You can just like manually like bring it out, and it's going to help it function really well. If it's too tight, a block plane, and going into tools again, because I'm a nerd, I don't buy a block plane from Home Depot. They're not really, the steel isn't good, they're just not really great. But I'm also cheap. I can't spend $200 on a block plane from some fancy wood place. You go to the antique fair, or you go to some junk shop, find one of these for $20, they're 100 years old, and you spend all afternoon tuning them up, and it's the best plane ever. It's as good as that $200 plane. And these you can really easily just take off as much as you need if it's fitting too tight with the mother stripping, and you can make it work really well. Sanding it just when if you do take some off, because you will get splinters. And you can also wax that too. Again, depending on how much time you have and how many windows you're doing, you wax that up against the weather stripping, it works super well. It doesn't rattle, and your energy efficiency is as good as the new window. It's great. One of the nuts and bolts things that other window people have talked about is, this is called the meeting rail. The design has changed, different manufacturers, different time periods. This is just a classic kind of like, those older windows from the Stanford Mansion are basically like this. You have your upper window sash, this is side view, and then you have your lower window sash. This space in here, where the parting bead is, that's the space that you want to fill. So the Stanford Mansion ones just have, that space is just filled with a simple block. These are shaped more like, they have, the shape more with an angle. It's one way to do it. What I've seen a lot of is, I have to think about this, honestly. Yeah, that piece is, yeah. It's basically two mating pieces with a little thing in there. Either way, any of the systems work, whatever you have, just, if you clean it up really well, and they're gonna go back to like having a good sharp chisel or a really good scraper, and cleaning up those edges, when you put your hardware, if you have your original hardware, and that's a clean edge, and all your other stuff is rebuilt, it's gonna bring those together, because the way these window sweeps work is they're designed to, the more you close it, the more it pushes your window together. And if that surface is really clean, it's gonna there's gonna be no air gap. What happens is that's where a lot of paint has been built up over the years. And that's why you need to make that flat. And also people have replaced the old hardware, because it gets painted, it gets rusty, all this kind of stuff happens. People put new window hardware on, and they use the wrong stuff, or it's put in the wrong spot because the old holes were better, or the holes are different, and they don't get the concept of it. It's like supposedly meeting up. So if you have the old hardware, you can actually clean up the old hardware, put it back on, maybe put some oil on it, and it'll work like brand new. And if you have that, the median rails clean, it's gonna work like a dream. I'll talk more about hardware later, but that's that. So, at this point, the window looks pretty good. We haven't discussed the sashes. I just am in the habit of rebuilding the opening first and then dealing with the sashes after the fact, because it's two different worlds. You could rebuild the sashes and then rebuild the opening. It doesn't matter. It all needs to be done. There are a lot of typical problems with sashes. Here's one from a house that, I was at that window workshop in Monterey, and my friend calls me and he says, hey, my neighbors are throwing out their old windows, do you want them? And I said, yes. I said, I can pick them up this weekend with sight unseen, I'm just gonna take them. I don't need any windows, and I'm not doing this professionally, but old wavy glass and, you just can't seem to go in the dumpster, it's just terrible. So, and I have a stash, and if somebody needs an old piece of wavy glass, I can help them out. But this was from that batch, and these windows are fine. They're totally fine. And it's got wavy glass. It's got fantastic wavy glass. It's fantastic. It's just got like your typical problems. It's got a broke piece of hardware. You can see all the paint buildup right there. I'm sure these things rattle like crazy. The ropes are probably broken. Actually, the nylon cheap stuff from the hardware store, it has everything wrong with it except the window sash itself is fine. So there's a lot to think about with these window sashes, and I'm obsessed about this a lot, of course. Because I am a woodworker, and I like working with wood, and I love wood joinery. And you start to see patterns with the windows. If you understand how they were put together, you can take them apart the same way, if you need to. You can take an old sash, and you can actually manipulate the size to make it work for what you need. That way you're still using old stuff. Because like I said, the wood is fantastic. Or sometimes what you see is, that's fine, this is fine. This ends up being, like, if water sat there and the bottom part of the glazing gets hammered the worst, so this would be rotted or just like in really bad shape. If you know how this came apart, you could actually take this piece off, rebuild this piece, and put a new piece on in the old window. It's a really great way to go. It's fussy, and you probably need to be a woodworker to really do that stuff. So if you're not a woodworker, befriend a woodworker, because if you understand the concept, then you can work with them to kind of get what you need done. This is an interesting thing I discovered recently, and I recently took this piece off of here because it used to be where I know they're usually loose, but not loose enough to come apart. And I know it's mortise and tenon joinery and all that stuff, and I've seen how they had like some kind of peg at some point. And then it occurred to me, I'm like, you know, if you scrape away the paint and you find where that nail was, and typically, I've started to see a pattern to where there are these steel nails, these thick steel nails, and if you find where they are, you can take a nail set and a hammer and hammer them out. And because the glue is 100 years old, the window will just come right apart. And you've got these pieces that you can salvage. I think it's fantastic. Whether you think it's fantastic or not, I don't know. But I'm pretty excited about that because you can't beat that joinery and you can't beat the wood. If you clean up these pieces and you re-glue that and you put those nails back in, it's a brand new sash. It's fantastic. It's better than new. So I'm all for that. And also in terms of window repair, this is a fun recent project. There's a state park in Napa where they have an old building, and during the wildfires last year, somebody had one of these casement windows open, and the wind caught it, and in the middle of a fire, and this window just hit the ground because it was on the second story and just shattered into a billion pieces. And they contacted me and said, "Can you build us a new window?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I can build a new window." And I went up there and I grabbed all the pieces and took the measurements, and this is all just in pieces. So I took all the pieces and I took them home, and I went, all the pieces that I salvaged from this window are actually fine or repairable. And I only had to make a few extra pieces. I think I can't, and now I can't even really tell which ones I replaced. But I think I made a couple of these and one of these, that sort of thing. And I cleaned up all the pieces and I put it back together. And now it's a perfectly functional window. And I saved all the old wood, and they can just put this thing right back in. And I'm pretty happy about that because there was no need for like new wood or anything, except for like where I had to replace a couple pieces. So it can be done. It can be done. And I think it's the best way to save historical stuff too. So.
Question. I have mainly casement windows, and I had heard that it was possible from New Home to get these very thin pieces of wood to put in instead of glazing compound to keep the window in the.
Sticking? Is that
I don't know what
sticking?
you call it.
No,
No?
I don't like it because you're still gonna have moisture building up in there, and unless you keep that little piece of wood sealed, and I'm sure they'd recommend like silicone or something like that, that stuff's all gonna be great. And when we had the window class at Silmar, there was a person from Sacramento actually who was saying, well, I like to use caulk here and I like to use silicone here, and I was just not into that at all. And luckily the historian for state parks was on my side because we're supposed to do things, we're mandated by the state of California to use traditional methods and materials where we can. And I think if you use just a traditional glazing, and I'll show you how I glaze windows, it can work really well. And if you maintain that glazing, it's gonna last a lot longer and preserve that window better than like putting wood in. Because I think you're gonna have more problems with moisture, the silicone breaking down, the nails rusting, all kinds of problems, so.
Yeah, and if you're the person following and restoring the person who put the silicone in there, it like pulls pieces of the wood off.
Exactly.
It's like to get it out, to do the restoration, the old glaze with the heat gun just comes right out, and then the silicone is a pain.
Mm-hmm. I
It
agree.
kind of looks like they did it with toothpaste, but it was.
So, I think here's what we'll do. Typically, some of the big problems that you have is you'll have cracked glass. That might be why you're redoing it. Or you have really bad glazing, bad paint, you know, you have to deal with that sort of thing. So, I'll talk about how I deal with the glass part of it. And then we'll go from there. I just replaced a pane of glass in Old Sacramento last week where some kid leaned against it and cracked it. And so one of the, how do I put this nicely? An employee for the parks who is not been there that long, a little young, and just kind of collecting a paycheck, was taking the glass out. And so they were in charge of taking glass out. And they're not as fussy about this stuff as I am. I like to keep this edge clean. Like you can't just, if you're trying to get that old glazing out and you're just chunking up this surface, when you put the new glazing in, it's gonna look terrible. And the next time it happens, it's gonna look even worse. So I try to like really clean up all the old glazing as good as you can, to really maintain the crispness of each of these edges. It's gonna make it look a lot better. There are different methods with removing the glass, and this is a perfect example of even me being a little frustrated because there are people that think, you know, if you take some metal and you take a heat gun, you soften up that old glazing, you can pop it off that way. There's a pretty good chance that you'll do okay. I tend to use the sharp chisel and just knowing the angle and being really careful and knowing how much pressure and wear from years of experience, I've had decent luck. I will say that if I had to put a percentage on it, I can save about 60 to 70% of the old glass, but that's not a really good ratio, and I don't think other people have much more success. It's a crapshoot, and you want to save that old glass, but you can't always save it. And sometimes if you get that crack going, you try to save the biggest piece you can for the next project, because that old wavy glass, they don't make glass like that anymore except for restoration glass, which doesn't look exactly the same. Looks close, but it's not exactly the same, and it's really expensive, really expensive. So, meanwhile, there's like a bunch of that old wavy glass just getting tossed in dumpsters, and it's heartbreaking. So, you know, my typical rule of thumb, and I think this is another good example, you know, this, I break this thing. This window was pretty, they didn't paint my house a whole lot, which I thought was a good thing because I didn't have a lot of bad areas of latex paint. I had just a few layers of really good oil-based, like toxic lead paint. Because lead actually sands really nicely, and, you get a good look. But because this,
It's hitting your shirt. No, when you lean forward, the mic hits your shirt.
okay. But because this wasn't maintained really well for a long time, the glaze has just popped out. And since I've used this as a demo model, even more glazing has popped out. Oh, it should probably just pop right out. My rule of thumb is if 2/3 of the glazing comes out easily, remove it all.